بسم الله.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرج. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أذل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكس في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينظر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد
صلوات محمد وعلى محمد
اللهم صل على
درد و علم کا مرکز احساس بن گئی درد و علم کا مرکز احساس بن گئی بے آس قافلے کے لیے آس بن گئی اور دن ڈل گیا تو شام میں غریباں کے ساتھ ساتھ دن ڈھل گیا تو شام میں غریباں کے ساتھ ساتھ بیٹی علی کی حضرت عباس بن گئی درد و علم کا مرکز صلوات محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل
بولی ماں کیا ہوا سکینہ کو غشیے کیوں آ گیا
سکینہ
غشیے کیوں آ گیا سکینہ کیوں یہ خاموش ہو گئی آخر کس نے کیا کہہ دیا
سکینہ
کس نے کیا کہہ دیا
سکینہ کو
کیا قبر اس کو کیا ہوا بیٹا دیکھو اب ذرا
سکینہ
دیکھو اب ذرا
سکینہ کو
جسم ہے سرد نفس ساکت ہے کیا ہوا اے خدا
سکینہ
کیا ہوا اے
خدا سکینہ
نا شکایت ہے اب تماچوں کی نہ رسن کا گلا سکینہ نہ رسن کا گلا
سکینہ
ہائے غربت میں چھین کر مجھ سے لے گئی کیوں
قضا سکینہ
لے گئی کیوں
قضا سکینہ
ساتھ ہی اب سعید کے مل کر روئے اہل عزا سکینہ کو روئے اہل عزا سکینہ کو بولی ماں کیا فاتحہ بستر سے تھر تھرا کے اٹھی تھام کر عصا قبر نبی پہ فاتحہ آخری پڑا ہم سایوں کے گھر گئی رخصت کو اور کہا
لو صاحب و بیل کرو پوچھے
لو صاحب و بیل کرو
پوچھے میرا
ایزا تھی تم سبوں کو میرے شور و شین سے
کل فاطمہ نہ ہوئے گی تم سونا چین
کل فاطمہ نہ ہوئے گی
تم سونا چین سے
ہمسایوں کے حقوق سے آگاہ ہے جہاں لوگوں میرے یتیموں سے رہنا نگہباں اب ساتھ ان کا اور تمہارا ہے ہم کہاں
بن ماں کے ہوتی ہے میری دکھیاری
بن ماں کی ہوتی ہے میری
دکھیاری بیٹیاں
بچپن پہ اپنے بچوں کے آنسو بہاتی ہوں
تم پر حسن حسین کو میں چھوڑے جا
تم پر
حسن حسین کو میں چھوڑے جاتی ہوں
رو کر کبھی حسن کو گلے سے لگا لیا آغوش میں حسین کو گاہے بٹھا لیا رخصت کیا کسی کو بلا لیا
پڑھنے کے واسطے کبھی قرآن اٹھا
پڑھنے کے واسطے
کبھی قرآن اٹھا لیا
کہتی تھی گاہ بچوں سے منہ اپنا موڑ کے
کل سونے گھر میں سونا ہے بستی کو چھوڑ
کل سونے گھر میں سونا ہے بستی کو چھوڑ
کے
سن لو وصیت میری اس وقت یا امام فضا سے میرے بعد عدالت سے لینا کام ہوشیار فاطمہ کی امانت سے صبح و شام
دو بیٹیاں دو بیٹے بس اور خدا
دو بیٹیاں دو بیٹے
بس اور خدا کا نام
میں نے بڑے دکھوں سے یہ سب بچے پالے ہیں
حق کے حوالے تم یہ تمہارے
حق کے حوالے
تم یہ تمہارے حوالے ہیں
سب ہاشمی قسم میری قسمت کی کھاتے ہیں مجھ کو عرب کے رسم سے اندیشے آتے ہیں عورت کا مردہ تخت پر رکھ کر اٹھاتے ہیں
آثار اس میں مردے کے سب پائے
آثار
اس میں مردے کے سب پائے جاتے ہیں
دیتی ہوں میں قسم تمہیں روح رسول کی
والی نہ یوں اٹھائے یوں میت بطول
والی نہ یوں اٹھائے
یوں میت بطول کی
ہے آرزو کے قبر میں مجھ کو حسن لٹائے، شبیر میرے مردے کا منہ قبلہ روپ رائے، پھر خود کہا نہیں نہیں بچہ ہے ڈر نہ جائے،
ناگاہ کھیلتے ہوئے دونوں یتیم،
ناگاہ
کھیلتے ہوئے دونوں یتیم،
چھاتی لگا کے بولی کے لو ہم تو مرتے ہیں،
تم سے سلوک دیکھیے کیا لوگ کر، تم سے سلوک دیکھیے کیا لوگ کرتے ہیں،
لے کر بلائیں بیٹی کی زہرا نے یہ کہا، روتی تو ہوں زیادہ نہ زینب مجھے رلا، کچھ بھائیوں کے سونپنے کا سمجھی مدعا،
تو ان کی رونے والی ہے زہرا تیرے،
تو
ان کی رونے والی ہے زہرا تیرے فدا،
کیا بس میرا جو مرضی پروردگار ہے،
زینب تمام کنبے کی تو سوار،
زینب
تمام کنبے کی تو سوار،
یہ کہتی تھی کہ غش نے دیا موت کا پیام، حجرے سے نکلے روتے ہوئے اقربا تمام، ترتیب ناش کے لیے باہر گئے امام،
زہرا نے یا مسلح پہ اپنا کیا، زہرا نے یا مسلح پہ اپنا کیا مقام،
لکھا ہے بس نماز عشاء کی ادا ہوئی،
اور وہ لٹا کے بنتے نبی کی خزا، اور وہ لٹا کے بنتے نبی کی خزا ہوئی،
ماتھا حسن نے مردے کے ماتھے پہ رکھ دیا، رو رو کے اماں اماں کہا اور غش ہوا، تلووں سے اپنے ماتھے کو شبیر نے ملا،
پاؤں میں دم نہ پائے تو یہ کام ہے،
پاؤں میں دم نہ پائے
تو یہ کام ہے،
میں آپ کا غلام ہوں
اور نور آواز حسین وما حسین، آواز حسین وما حسین،
Respected viewers, on behalf of Anwar Bhai and family, I'd like to thank you all for joining this Majlis Barsi of Marhuma Dure Shahwar Rizvi binte Syed Sabir Hussain Kazmi. May I request you all to kindly recite Surah Fatiha for Marhuma. ایک سورہ فاتح کی گزارش ہے، مرحومہ در شہوار رضوی بنتے سید صابر حسین قاسمی کی رخ میں ساتھ فرما دیجیے۔ بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم۔ I would now like to invite Hujjatul Muslimin Maulana Abbas Razawi sahab to please come online to recite the majlis for this evening. محمد وآل محمد بآواز بلند صلوات۔
اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد۔
We could begin with reciting Surah Fatiha, please. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا بالقاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أما بعد، قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. It's difficult for me to believe that it's been over a year now since Marhuma left us. And time is moving very fast. It always reminds me of a tradition of the Imam alayhi salam. When talking about time, he says that, look, as time goes on, and before the advent of the Imam who we're waiting for as long as this time period goes on and the Imam doesn't come, especially this time before Qiyamah, you'll see that time itself begins to accelerate. Time begins to accelerate. Months start seeming like days. Years start seeming like months. And then from then onwards, as you've all heard the tradition, days become hours, hours become minutes, and so forth. Essentially, Baraka is lifted from time. There's no Baraka. And you find that, especially in the times that we live in, 21st century, these last 12 to 13 months were of significance to us to rebalance ourselves. For every trial, tribulation, test that Allah puts us through, He gives us an opportunity to balance ourselves, to recalibrate ourselves. And so you find that in this COVID-19 period, not much has changed really. It's almost like the springboard effect. And sometimes what happens is that when you compress a spring too much, when it shoots up again, sometimes it goes higher than before. And you find that you just have to go onto the streets and you'll see that people have less patience. People in and of itself have less belief. People are suffering. And much of this is to do with the lack of barakah. Now, our grandparents, and perhaps our parents' generation, spoke about the concept of barakah. But today what you're finding is that there's less of it. And as time begins to go, you find even less barakah. Question is this: you may ask me, what does barakah mean? Barakah effectively is blessings, but what is blessings? Look, Mubarak, Mabruk, Tabarruk, Baraka. All of it comes from the same family. When you go to a masjid, afterwards, the host or whoever's sponsored the majlis, let's say, or even the masjid itself, they'll give you Tabarruk, something which is blessed. You wish each other on the day of Eid, you say Eid Mubarak, meaning what? Again, you're basically sharing blessing with one another. Mabruk, something that has become Mubarak, right? So in this way, there's a concept known as blessing, and today we don't know much about it. But let me give you a very quick example of what blessing is. What is barakah? So that you understand. Unfortunately, we've not had many discussions from the member on this, at least within my knowledge, within English. I'll give you an example. There are three qualities of barakah. And if you bear this in mind, you'll come to see how you can apply it in your own life. Barakah, as Allama Tabatabai says, he says, is something that when you look at it, it doesn't seem very much. But the effect of it is lasting. So barakah begins on this point. Barakah is khair, is goodness. And barakah is something which is continuous. And barakah is something which is beneficial. So there's three qualities here. I'll give you an example. This Quran in front of me. If I stack this Quran with all the other books that I have, it will just seem like a book. But this Quran has full of barakah. Why? Firstly, is goodness. Secondly, until the day of judgment is continuous. And thirdly, it has benefits for more than we can imagine. I'll give you an example. Let me just open it up randomly. As I open this up randomly, right in front of me, there's a verse. That verse of the Quran is from Surah Yasin. This particular verse of the Quran, if it's recited a particular amount of times, and a person who's born blind, their eyesight will be given to them, for example. That's one page. Let's say if I open up another page. Here I've opened up another page. Another surah has come in front of me. When I look at this surah, and I look at the first line of the surah, I know that if I recite this particular surah for 40 days at a particular amount of times, then Allah will give me so much rizq that I will never have to worry about money, right? So now these are 2 times I've opened with the Quran. What's the difference between this book and this book? For the outsider, you wouldn't see any difference. The fact is this Quran has a lot of barakah. Let's open it a 3rd time, just to give it a try. Let's see what happens. Let's open it from the back. Here we are. Here's a particular verse of the Quran. There's an entire chapter here, right in front of me. If this chapter, which is on my left-hand side, was to be recited 3 times a day, it will shut anyone's mouth who decides to do ghibah of you. 3 times I've opened the Quran up, 3 different things have come out. What does that tell you? That book, for the average eye, doesn't mean much. But what it has is very powerful. Similarly, let's say, for example, you have $10 or £10. Sometimes there's so much barakah in that £10 that it lasts a month, whereby you look at people who are earning maybe £10,000, £50,000. And I know people like this. I know certain people who have earned £1 million a month. And what happens? They're still begging that we don't seem to have enough money. Why? Lack of barakah. And it could be the fact that the money is haram. But it also could be multiple other reasons. Whether we know it or we don't know, that barakah is taken away. Now I'm building this case because of something. I want to get to something. I want people to understand something here. A message. Because this message is beneficial, not just for us, but this message is beneficial for that person who's left us as well. Because ultimately, they too require an act which is going to be full of barakah so they can benefit until the day of judgment in their grave. Now, barakah doesn't have to be just something which is spiritual or physical in that respect. I'll give you another example. Time also has barakah. Now look and see. Some of our great scholars, they wrote so many different books. For example, one scholar, over 750 books. Now, in a time where all you have, for example, is a pen and paper, to be able to write so much so that you have that many books, you look at some of the past works. The guy who compiled Nahj al-Balagha, for example, Syed Radi, imagine the work that he's done, that to this day, when people read it, its benefit is going to him. Just a compilation of sermons. Or you look today, something like Usul Kafi. Or you look at, other books, for example, books of dua. Until the day of judgment, there's a lot of benefit to it. Now, the question is this, okay, the book has a lot of barakah in it, but the time itself, imagine if you're Allama Majlisi and you've just written 110 volumes of a book handwritten. And not just that, you've gone and you've compiled hundreds of thousands of hadith in a time where you have no search, where you have no Google, where you have no CD. How does a person do that? Barakah. Time itself has barakah. Sometimes you find that time is leaving you very quickly, but other times time itself extends for you. I'll give you an example. Allama Amini is a famous scholar. He's written Al-Ghadir. Al-Ghadir is an entire voluminous book based upon the hadith of Ghadir, where he backs wilaya. Now, it's not the fact that Allama Amini lived 200 years ago. His son is alive today. His sons are alive today. Some of them are in Qom, Tehran, Najaf, wherever they may be. But the fact is, he's not somebody who's that ancient. When Allama Amini was in Lucknow, and he went there to the library, Nasiriyah, where you have a book which roughly has 60 volumes to it, written by an Indian by the name of Mir Hamid Hussain Musawi, which is the strongest book on wilayat ever written in Shi'ism, strongest book of Aqidah written in Shi'ism, known as Tabaqat al-Anwar. When he was in Lucknow, a Wahhabi came to him. You could say a Wahhabi, probably either Ahl Hadith or Deobandi, came to him and he said, look, you guys say that Imam Ali used to recite 1,000 units of prayer every night. He goes, how is that physically possible? If we calculate it, you need 16 hours to be able to recite it. And the average night, whatever anybody may say, may not be more than 8 hours, for argument's sake. Allama Amini knew, look, this guy doesn't understand the concept of Baraka. Now, Allama Amini, one of his legs there was a problem with his leg that he couldn't walk. He would drag his leg. So there was very limited use. Eyewitnesses say that Allama Amini got up, looked towards Najaf, said, Ya Ali, and he started to pray. After he finished, he said, it took me 7 hours to do 1,000 units of prayers, and I can't even walk properly. Imagine if I can do it, then what can Ali ibn Abi Talib do? Right, what does that tell you? That's barakah in time. If a person has barakah in time, in his health, in his wealth, in his actions. Now look carefully and see. Most of your du'as which you're reciting in the month of Sha'ban, in the month of Ramadan, on the night of Qadr, you're praying to Allah for barakah. Look at it and see. Just analyze and see your du'as. Just look at the meaning of it. Just see what you're asking. To the extent that the Prophet of God says, he says to Amir al-Mu'mineen, whenever you go to a new city, let's say, for example, I travel to Birmingham, and I'm going to stay there, even for 3 days a week or whatever it may be. The first thing one should do is ask Allah, Allah, make this place for me full of barakah. Make it mutabarrik for me. Make me mabruk, essentially. Make this place mabruk for me. Right? What's the purpose of that? The purpose is that not everything is tangible. Not everything is. So look, what can we do to make sure that that barakah continues? Because barakah is beneficial. I'm going to give you one more story. Then I'll come on to exactly what I wanted to say. Mafatihul Jinan, right, is a book that all of you have. Now, there's multiple books of dua, but I doubt the vast majority of people, Shias, would know them. I'll give you an example. Aqbal al-A'mal. How many of the viewers, brothers and sisters, all know that book? Very few. They're books which have been written by Ibn Taus, Muqaddas al-Dabili, Sheikh al-Saduq, Sheikh Tusi, Sheikh Mufid. You've got Mazar al-Qadim, for example, which hardly anyone's probably ever heard of, Book of Dua. But the one book you have all heard of is the Mafatihul Jinan. That book has so much barakah that today, Sheikh Abbas Razawi's legacy is remembered. Whichever haram you go to, you have the Quran, you have the Mafatih side by side. When he was dying, he was on his deathbed. One of the students came to him, and again, he's a scholar from the 20th century. He's not going back 200 years. A person comes to him, one of the students, Zahiran or a scholar comes to him, and they say, look, we're going to Mashhad. He begins to cry. So they asked him, so why are you crying for? He says, I wish I could go to Mashhad, but I know that I'm on my last legs. So at that moment, this person replies, he says, look, why are you worried for? He goes, every single person who goes to Mashhad has a small Sheikh Abbas Razawi under his armpit, meaning what? Fatihul Jinan. Now look, not all of us are Sheikh Abbas Qummi. Not all of us are Allama Tabatabai. Not all of us are Allama Amini. What is the one thing that we can do that will benefit our parents or anyone who are marhumin in the grave? That will benefit, let's say, my wife who's deceased. Whoever it may be, my husband, whatever it may be, how does one benefit? Islam says a couple of things. Today in Sindh, let's say, $900 can help you make a well. For as long as people are drinking from that, continuously you're benefiting. You know, if not for your deceased, for yourself, do that. So that one day, all of us are going to die. You're not reliant on anyone to recite Fatiha for you. You're not reliant on that. Even if you have a plaque, not without your name, just to say, the person who donated for this recite a Fatiha. You don't even need that. People who are drinking, because we worry, right? Who's going to recite Fatiha for me? You know what? Even if you have 1,000 people who recite Fatiha, after 2 generations, people forget you. Today we're here remembering a woman who dedicated her life for Ahlul Bayt. Let me ask you a question. How many people recite a Fatiha for her great-grandfather? It's a generic question. Forget that. How many people recite Fatiha? Okay, let's put it on me. For my great-grandfather, for my great-great-grandfather, right? For his father, for his father. How many people? How many generations? Within 100 years, people forget. Great scholars have gone. How many people? Unless if you're buried in the haram, where somebody sees you, like, let's recite a Fatiha. So many great people have come and gone. How many people go and recite a Fatiha? People don't even know where these great scholars are, where their graves are. So look, people forget. Time takes you on. But the actions which you do are beneficial. One of those actions is this. Make a well. Dig a well. Firstly. Secondly, okay, let's say $900 is too much money. Though in the grand scheme of things, when Allah decides to give something back to you, He will give it back to you tenfold. But okay, let's say if it's too much money. How about educating a child? You know, today in Iraq, Afghanistan is even worse. $30, £20 per month can help you educate a child. If that child happens to be the future Ayatollah Khoi, your dunya and your akhirah is made. You don't need anybody then to recite a Fatiha for you. You're not reliant on anyone. The greatest people make sure the hisab is done in this world so that nobody is needed. They're independent. Wa Allah's ghani. Allah takes care of them. If a human being truly does the responsibility that Allah has given on them, they will not need anyone to look after them. Allah will take care of them themselves. This is the way that I look at it. I look at it and see, today, let's say for argument's sake, my son is loyal to me, let's say today. Tomorrow he may not be. The day after that he may forget me. The day after that he could be my best friend again. Human beings' temperament is such. You don't know who's going to become munharif. This is why we pray. In the words of a person, he said, I was in the haram of Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida, Mashhad. 3 of the biggest urafa of Mashhad were there. Ayatollah Tehrani was sitting in one corner. Ayatollah Falsafi was sitting in another corner. Sibawayh was sitting in another corner. He says, I went to all of them. And I asked them, if you only had one dua which was to be accepted, what would it be? All of them said, Akhibat bakhair. Said, we can't predict how we're going to die. If we can't predict, can you give a sanad for other people who are your grandchildren, your children, your great-grandchildren? You can't do. The only person who can give a sanad is Rasulullah to 11 of his descendants and his nafs, Amir al-Mu'mineen, and his daughter. But no father in history can give a sanad. Only Rasulullah can. He says, Hussain and Hussain, all the way down, all of them are me. Awwaluna Muhammad, Awsatuna Muhammad, Akhiruna Muhammad, Kulluna Muhammad. Only one man can give a sanad. Nobody else can. So when you can't, what has Allah done? He's given us ways of taking care. If you can't do anything, let's say even $30 is too much. You eat an apple, right? When you go to the masjid, somebody giving an apple. Apple has seeds in it. Put the seeds in and let that grow into a tree. For as long as that tree survives and people take shade under that tree or benefit from that tree, thawab is going to you. So look, at every stage, if you look at it, what has Allah done? He's given you an ability to benefit. This is what's known as barakah. Now look, it's taken me a little while to explain this. In fact, it's taken me half an hour to explain this, or maybe more than that. But now to come on to a key point here, and this is this. What deprives barakah? Now, when I say this, I'm looking at myself, because I've got to improve myself first and foremost. So I'm doing this for myself, and then if anybody can benefit from that, then benefit from it. There are three things which amongst the Arabs is universal. In fact, even before Islam is universal. Three things which are seen as three qualities that a human being should have, good human being. One is wafa, wafa of your promise. To fulfill a promise that you've made with somebody, be they a kafir, is honorable. In fact, Islam says whoever, even if you've made a promise to an animal, let's say, when you stick a carrot out in front of a horse, that is not jaiz because it's false. He'll never grab it, right? But when you give something or you show that you're going to give something to somebody, fulfill it. Don't lead anybody on in that respect. So that wafa of promise is one thing. Second thing is to give back amana, or to hold amana, right, properly, not to usurp it, regardless of who it is. Third thing is this, which gives barakah, ahsanul walidain. I'll give you an example. A mother and a father can disown a child even after they're dead. Some people come on the day of judgment, they're like, whoa, I did so much good for my parents, and they realize they've been disowned. So at that point they ask Allah, Allah, what happened? They said, look, your parents disowned you when they were in the grave. I go, why? I said, because you didn't remember them. You didn't fulfill their haqq. So what's their haqq? Had the haqq is this, that on a Thursday night you recite a Yasin for them. You remember them by a Fatiha. You may do a majlis for them. Majlis. This is what Ayatollah Marashi Najafi said to his son. He says, son, when I die, come to my grave on a Thursday night and just recite Masaib of Ali Akbar. Now there's a secret behind this. This is Ayatollah Marashi Najafi. It's not a small person. Similarly, if you have a problem, let me give you a secret today. Let me give you something for free. Those are people don't respect that which is given for free. Let me give it free. Why? You know why? Because where we're getting it from is Ahlul Bayt. And their coffers are such that they've got too much. Between Asr time on a Thursday and before Dhuhr time on a Friday is meant to be the best time that you should be reciting Yasin for your deceased. Now, if you fall into a big problem, right, you're fallen into a major problem and your parents are not alive, go to the grave at this particular time and recite a Yasin and then ask them to pray for you. From experience of people, dua becomes mustajab because there's a direct link between the person in the grave and Allah. You've given the Yasin to your parent, as your mother or father, whatever it may be. There's a direct connection there. But you can ask me something. You can say, well, look, let's say if my mother or father is in Pakistan, what do I do in that situation? In that situation, go to the graveyard of the Muslimin. So for us in South London, it would be Rowan Road. You go there and you recite Yasin. Let's say if you can't get there either, then you, in your own home, draw a line and recite Yasin. And you'll see that if there's something desperate in your life, slowly you'll see that there's a change which will start coming. Now take this and apply it. Everything I'm saying, implement it. The beauty is when you apply it, it's not just saying it. You'll think, is it true? Isn't it? Try, do it. Let's see if it works. Apply it. So therefore, if a parent's dua is that powerful in their grave, let me take you to a story. There was a man who had gone to various ulama because of issue of risk. Financially, he was broke. Whatever he did, money wouldn't come. A time eventually came where he went to Mashhad, against the story of Mashhad, and he went to one of the Urafa there. He said, I went to Nuqudiki Isfahani, the great Arif. He gave me a zikr, didn't work. So this Arif had his head down. And when this man began to walk away, he looked to the side. He said, the reason why his du'as are not working is because his mother's unhappy with him. But call him back. Let's ask him. Let's see what we can do. Called him back. He said, do you have haqqun nas on your shoulder? He says, by God, I don't have any. I've fulfilled the rights of my neighbors. I've fulfilled. And he went on, he said, what about salat al-raham? Do you meet your relatives? Because remember, you have to have good relationships with your relatives, or at least try to. If there's ever a fight, you should never cut off. If they cut off, that's one thing, but you should never cut off. Because there are awarith, there backfire, side effects. One of them is your life is shortened. But anyhow, I don't want to get into the technicalities of Silat Rahim. The reason why I'm mentioning the story, you'll see in a minute. He says, what about your parents? He says, no, my parents are happy with me. He said, think. He thought, it's actually, there's one issue. My mother may not be happy with me. He says, why? He says, one day my mother and my wife were arguing. I knew my mother was wrong. So in front of my wife, I told her she was wrong. My mother was upset. I apologized. He looked up and he says, that's not how you apologize. I want you to go now and apologize to her properly. So he went and he sat with his mother. He says, look, I did wrong. As they were saying Farsi, ghalat karda. He says, I did wrong. Mother said, no, I forgive you. Because at the time you did this in front of my daughter-in-law, because of that, Allah constricted his rizq. One action. And here I will always say this, parents have a big heart. The reason being is that one small action can sometimes cause, you can imagine how merciful Allah is then. One action can restrict a rizq. Why? One unhappiness. And this is why it's important again. When you have two people who you're related to, it could be a mother, father, it could be a wife, people who have haqq on you, children. That's why they say that try not to interfere in a row that's taking place between two people, even if you can see who's right, who's wrong. If you want to really explain, afterwards privately take them away, explain them so that they don't get offended. But in situations like that, it's very difficult because there's ego involved. Not everyone is spiritually refined. People do get offended, but it's very difficult in that situation. There's another story about a guy called Zachary Ibrahim. Right? Zachary Ibrahim was a Christian who converted to Islam. He used to live with his Christian mother. One day he comes to the sixth Imam. He goes to Hajj, in fact. He sees the sixth Imam on Hajj, or he goes to visit him in Medina after Hajj. He says to the Imam, give me a nasiyat. The Imam says, is your mother alive? He says, yes. He says, but my mother's Christian. He says, do good to her. Feed her with your hands. Wash her because she's old. And all the protocol that goes with the Imam. So he comes back, and he starts feeding his mother, clothing his mother. So she says, son, something's changed about you when you've come back from Hajj. Why is there such a change? And in fact, Zachary bin Ibrahim said to the Imam, he said, but my mother's Christian. Do you want me to do all of this when she's Christian? He says, yes. So this old woman says, she says, why have you changed so much? He said, my mom told me. So she goes, is he a prophet? He goes, no, he's my imam. She goes, but son, he must be a prophet. This is the tradition of prophets to give nasir like this. He goes, no, he's the successor to the prophet. They say she converted just on that. Multiple lessons here, but one is this. If you want to change somebody, change them with akhlaq. If you get angry with someone, it's not going to be beneficial unless if the anger is for Allah. And that's if Allah wants you to be angry at somebody. And angry means what? Angry means not to be emotional. But if you really want to change someone, the only way you can change him is through love. A person will never change if they feel that they're being attacked. And these are some of the lessons of life. You know why? Because even if you have an exchange, a harsh exchange with an outsider, forget your family, there are places where your barakah can constrict. This is why Urafa said, take care of your tongue. If you can't do anything, keep your mouth closed. To open your mouth is to destroy yourself. Ayatollah Abdul Karim Kashmiri never spoke. 20 years in Iran. One of my teachers used to say to me, it's like a graveyard. You sat with him, he just didn't speak. Tongue destroys you. We're all guilty of it, least of all myself. But this is something that we all need to work on. Akhlaq. It's important. To your mother and to your father. I'll give you another tradition. Syed Jamaluddin Gulpaygani. Great Arif, Buzurg, from Isfahan, Tahte Folat, is the graveyard where he's buried in. He used to have a hujra, he used to have a small room in Tahte Folat. One day he was praying there. The body of a boy, young man, not a boy, but a young man was brought to him, maybe in his 20s. They came to him, they said, look, oh, can you recite Talqeen? And these are the Urafa whose eyes are open to the haqaiq. When he got into the grave to recite Talqeen, he got up again and he came and he looked around because you could see there was adab coming down. Every time he was reciting Talqeen, there was no reply. From the body, the soul was saying, I don't understand. Because that's adab if you don't understand. He says, listen. He says, I can't understand you. He comes out, he looks at the mother. The mother was inconsolable. She was crying too much. He says, I can't go and speak to her. So the father was there. Father, his head down, he was crying. But he wasn't shouting. He comes up to the father, he says, it's your son. He says, yes. He said, did he wrong you by any chance? He says, my son was a good guy, but he was arrogant. He goes, I'm illiterate. My son was knowledgeable. When I used to educate people, I would sit in a circle. When I would raise a question, it was a very basic question. He would say to me, be savad, be quiet. Somebody who's illiterate, be quiet. But that broke my heart. Ayatollah said, Jawad Gulpaygani said, Jamaluddin Gulpaygani said, he said, brother, this is not the time to be upset. Your son's going through a lot of trouble at the moment. Man got a shock. He raised his hand and said, Allah, my son was a good boy. He made a mistake. I forgive him. You forgive him. Said Jamaluddin Gulpaygani says, I got into the grave. I said, listen to me. He says, now I can understand. One action, and this guy could have died a kafir. Imagine responsibility that we have. So if in life you find that your risk is constricted and your health begins to decrease and your children start becoming rebellious at a young age, and you find that respect is going, first port of entry, speak to your parents. Then after that, look and see if you've got anyone's haq on your shoulder. Did I insult somebody? Did I disrespect somebody? If I've disrespected an alim, 8th Imam says, Ayun akhbar al-rida. Imam, 8th Imam says, you've declared war on us. Now, you want to declare war on Insani Kamil, the one who controls the entire universe? Maybe I've disrespected an alim Rabbani, right? Maybe I've done something. Maybe I've taken somebody's haq. This is why within Islam, within our traditions, we've been told, muhasabah. Take hisab of yourself before Allah takes hisab of you. Right? But look, this discussion, I could easily go on, but I know that my time is at an end. I just want to say one more thing. You know, if you truly want to learn respect from the Ahlul Bayt. This Ramadan that's gone is a time of ghurba of Amir al-Mu'mineen. I pray all of you get an opportunity to be on the 21st night of Ramadan in the Haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen. I promise you, it will go year in, year out. Don't take it from me. The first time I took Mir Hassan Mir, he thought, okay, must be like any other, whatever he thought, he underestimated it at the time when we went there. You saw this year how many thousands of people he took from Pakistan, right? Go there and see yourself. On that night, see what it's like. It's nothing less than Ashura. Because everyone who's in the haram of the Imam feels the loneliness of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And you feel just before Fajr that Sayyidah Zainab has come. And when she comes there, you'll see somebody will shout, Labbaika ya Zainab, the entire place. And then when they do Wada'tu Amir al-Mu'mineen, the last 15, 20 minutes, it breaks your heart. Why do I say this? Learn akhlaq from Ahlul Bayt. You know what the Imam says? So when the Imam was hit on the head, it's unbelievable. When Ibn Muljim was brought to him, Ibn Muljim was shaking. Imam looks at him. He says, wasn't I your good Mawla? Wasn't I your good Imam? Looks at the Imam and goes, you were. But why did you do this to me? He says to Imam, Hassan I think he's scared. Undo his straps. Feed him what we eat. That's akhlaq. You can't be worse than the killer of the Imam. Even if you drank all of the liquor dry in the world, there would still be an opportunity for you to be gaining salvation. But the killer of the Imam has no method of salvation. So a time comes. The doctors come and they say to the Imam, Imam Hassan, they say, look, your father's going to die. He says, but we can delay the pain if you get him some milk. Tradition says, somebody told Ahl Kufa this. There was a knock on the door. When Imam Hassan opened the door, there were orphans, yatim, children standing out there. Each of them had a bowl in their hand. In the bowl there was milk. And each one of them was saying, give our father this milk, but don't take our father away from us. This is all we have. We'll give him our milk. Saying when Imam Hassan went in, Imam says something. He says, at least never take the haqq of an orphan. It's not going to take this now. That's akhlaq. Akhlaq is when Zahra, you know what the hadith says? Hadith says Zahra used to pray for others before she prayed herself. This is why when Imam Hussain was in the court of Marwan, if you remember, in Medina, Marwan says, give Yazid bayya. What did he say? He says, hey, hayhat min al-dhillah, right? Look at the next line that he says, though. People don't read this. He says, the person whose lap I grew up in, who gave me tarbiyah, would never allow me to give allegiance to a person like that. He remembered his mother at the time. And who was his mother? Even when her rib was broken, she was still lying there and praying for others. You know, there's a place in the hadith which is strange, which makes me think, what's the story with this? You know, sometimes it's strange when you read it. It says after Rasulullah's death, Zahra used to tie a band around her head. So look, her rib was bruised, but rib was broken, 2 ribs were broken, and she would tie a band on her head. I looked around everywhere to see why is that. One hadith of the 6th Imam tells us that. When she was coming after trying to gain her right, they say her man came. When that man came, they say he slapped her on the face that her earring broke. And from then onwards, her head used to hurt. So she used to tie her head because of that. Even in that situation, you found she was praying for other people. And this is why I'll say, understand who Ahlul Bayt are and understand their pain. Effectively, on the night when Amir al-Mu'mineen buried Zahra, there were 2 people he buried, not just one. He buried himself as well. For 30 years, the ghurba of the Imam is such that is unparalleled. Every Imam had somebody. Every one of them had somebody. Ali was alone. Ali ibn Abi Talib. Look at the tradition and see why. You can't cry, you can't vent your heart in front of your children. Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain. Imam Hussain had Sayyidah Zainab. Karbala, all the way to the 12th Imam. If you look at it, if there was one man who was gharib, he was Amir al-Mu'mineen. That day when he buried Zahra, he buried himself as well. And that day when he was in the grave, tradition says that his knees gave way when he tried to get out of the grave. His knees shook, he collapsed. He felt embarrassed. Children were watching. Salman was watching. Salman says, Mawla, we've never seen you fall in Badr, in Uhud, in Khaybar. He fell. Now imagine, he was 33 years old. Young man, loses his wife at a young age. 4 small children. Second time he collapses again. Tries to get up, collapses again. They say the final time when he tried to get up, he put his hand on the wall of the grave, begins to get up, felt his legs were shaking. And at that moment, as it is in his emotion, human beings, he says something. He says, Zainab, come and help me, because your father's feeling weak. Say 2 arms come out, small arms, 5-year-old girl. Says, Father, if my mother's not here, then I'm here. Imagine that. Imagine that for Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now imagine another place. The place is Sham. The place is the court of Yazid. Sayyid al-Shuhada's head is in the lap of Yazid. He's hitting the lips of Yazid. Yazid's hitting the lips of Imam Hussain. He looks up towards Sakina, he says something. He says, Sakina, I heard that your father loved you a lot. He said, if he truly loved you a lot, why don't you call your father and see if he comes to you or not? They said the small girl sat there, opened up her lap. She looks up and she says, Father, this mal'oon is testing the love that you have for me. She puts her arms out. She says, Father, come to me. Hadith says the head moves towards Sakina's lap. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. For the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, may Allah raise the status of Marhuma, and may Allah, for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, give peace and patience to our dear brother Syed Al-Noor Rizvi and his family. May Allah, for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, increase our barakah and rizq, and more importantly, hasten the door of the Imam. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin. And then back to Abu Pai.
متوجه زيارة Assalamu alaikum ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu alaikum ya Ibn Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum ya Ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen wa Ibn Sayyid al-Wasin. Assalamu alaikum Ibn Fatima al-Zahra Sayyidat Nisa'i al-Alameen. Assalamu alaikum ya Jami' al-Shuhada'i Karbala khususan Abul Fazl Abbas Ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا غريب الغرباء يا معين الظفاء والفقراء في يوم الجزاء سلطان يا أبو الحسن علي بن موسى رضا راضي بالقدر والقضاء. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحبي يصف الزمان ألمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم قل لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزقا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا رب. اللهم صل على محمد. Salam. Respected viewers, thank you once again. On behalf of Al-Noor Rizvi, I'd like to thank you all for joining. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Maulana Ali Abbas Rizvi Sahab for kindly taking time out and reciting this majlis. Once again, I'd like to request you all to please recite Surah Fatiha for Marhuma Dure Shahwar Rizvi, binte Syed, Sabir, Hussain, Kazmi. And also please include all your marhumins. I just came to know that people in India are really having a very, very tough time. Our own bhai who passed away a few months before, his elder brother, John Zaidi, Sayyid Nasir Sen Zaidi has passed away. My brother's mother-in-law in Hyderabad, she passed away, Rabab Begum binte Sayyid Muhammad Raza Rizvi. Also, please include all your marhumins, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman. Allahumma sallam. Please pray for all the people, especially people in Palestine, Yemen, and also in India and Pakistan, wherever people are really suffering. Let's recite a loud salawat for the well-being, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. चैन दुनिया में मिले, राहत उक़बा मिल जाए, शिद्दत इश्क मिले, गम का सलीखा मिल जाए, कासे दिल ये हाजिर हैं दरे दौलत पर, फातिमा आपकी औलाद का सदका मिल जाए. अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद. अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातहू.